Welcome to Help My Midlife Sucks, the show that digs into the number one question that flashes across the mind of almost everyone over 50. Is this all there is? Through personal insights, awe-inspiring guests, and entertaining stories, you'll discover the answer is hell no, and uncover your own ability to restore your juice and make this time of life the best ride ever. Now here's your host, Lori Dean.
It seems to me that for us women, the most impactful relationship that we have or don't have with a male is the one between us and our father. It's the lens through which we view men, whether it's our brothers, the boys at school, our boyfriends, our co-workers, our boss, our employees, our lovers, our spouses, and our own sons. And even all these years later, we can still be affected by that relationship. My father's no longer with me, and I must say that there have been a lot of times over the years when I've really stopped to try and figure out what our relationship was all about. But I do confess I was only looking at it from my point of view and wondering how it impacted me, and I never once stopped to consider what it was like for him to be my father. Well, Dad's not around for me to ask that question, but my guest tonight is someone who might be able to shed a little bit of light on that subject. His name is James I. Bond, and he is the author of the highly acclaimed book, The Secret Life of Fathers. He's been a behavioral management specialist for over 13 years, and because of his work in that field, he was able to get 101 fathers of daughters to really open up in a series of interviews that he turned into this book. It is eye-opening, it is groundbreaking, and the fathers have talked about subjects that men rarely talk about, their private fears and feelings about being fathers of daughters. James is here to share some of those with us tonight, some very intimate revelations and some real eye-openers about the effect that fathers have on women of all ages and these private fears and feelings of the men who have daughters. I am really looking forward to getting started and hearing all about that. But before we dive into this topic, I just have to take a minute or two to find out what it is like to go through life with the name James Bond.
So actually, I got a call from MTV when Daniel Craig, the new James Bond, when he first his movie was about to come out. And apparently James Bond is a very common name.
Really?
And they were calling James Bonds across the U.S. to get feedback about every time there's a new James Bond movie, how does that affect your life?
And does it affect your life?
Yeah, it does. I mean, in the beginning, I shied away from it. It was just a bit of a pain that, everybody's talking about it and everything else. But it's fun. And it's just what a fun way to, it's my name. The hard part is I'll go to a room with like 200 people and they'll say, oh, there's James Bond. And like everybody knows my name. It's like everybody. And I'm like, oh, what's your name again? So,
yeah. And when you book into a hotel and make a reservation under James Bond, do you ever get any questions from the person taking the reservation, like they don't believe you?
Amazing. How often it doesn't stick that we show up and no reservation. So I had an investment banker I was interacting with, and his name was Jesse James. And so I called up and I said, hi, can I speak to Jesse? And she said, yeah, who's calling? I said, James Bond. She said, yeah, right, and hung up. I called back and she was so apologetic. I'm so sorry,
Oh, that's great. I don't want to get too far off topic, but I know my listeners are going to be wondering what this is about and if it's, really 007 that I have on the line. So thought we'd have a little bit of fun with that. But what, of course, I really want to talk about is your book and how it all came to be and just the phenomenal amount of information that you've gleaned from this project. But, when most people realize that a relationship with their daughter isn't quite what they want it to be, I don't think they immediately think, I'm going to interview other fathers and see what's going on the way you did. So it makes me wonder why you decided to do these interviews and then turn them into this book.
Well, for 13 years, I ran a behavioral management company working with huge companies, Fortune 500 companies. And so I'm supposed to be this with-it guy who knows all about relationships and all that. And when my middle daughter, Lauren, was 22, I discovered that the relationship I had with her wasn't as great as I thought. I mean, I thought it was a great relationship, but then I discovered that I was clueless, that my career got in the way, she was the quiet one. I actually heard about this mean prank that happened when she was young, that my older two kids, I have a son and 3 daughters, and my daughters are in their 20s now, and when she was 6 years old, my son and my older daughter played a mean prank on her. And when I heard this, it floored me, because it made me realize that here she was, she had grown up, and I never got to know her. And so I'll tell you the prank. So we lived in a house that butted up against a baseball field, a local baseball field, and the lights were on. It was dusk, and the fence was high enough that you couldn't see into the field, but if you opened up the fence a crack, you could see all the kids literally just outside the fence. And it was a Little League game. They were playing baseball, and like every boy in the neighborhood was there, and their parents. And so my son and my older daughter were looking through a crack in the fence, and they turned to Lauren, who was 6, who was inside the house, and said, Lauren, come out here. You've got to see this. And Lauren said, no. And they said, no, Lauren, it'll just take a second. You've got to see this. And Lauren said, well, I just took a shower. And they said, don't worry about it. Just come out here for a second. You've got to see this. So she went out into the backyard just with a towel on and went up to the fence and looked through the fence. You know, the kids, it's packed baseball of boys. And they rip off her towel and shove her naked onto the baseball field and close the fence. And so here she is, 6 years old, naked in front of just about every boy in the neighborhood and their parents. And so she turns around, she knocked on the fence, let me back in, guys, let me back in. They wouldn't let her back in. She had to walk naked all the way around the baseball field and around to the front to come to our house. And so when I heard this, I thought, wow, I mean, she was 6 years old. This was my baby, and this terrible thing happened to her. It has to have affected her. And what else has happened to her as she grew up? I realized she was the quiet one, and I never got to know her. My career got in the way, and just because she was the quiet one, I wondered, am I the only, well, I sent her an email saying this, that I feel really bad that you've grown up and I've never gotten to know you. And then she sent me an email back, and she said, I've been waiting my whole life to hear this. And she was 22 at the time. And I was so crushed. I was at work. I remember I was, working with a company, and I was just, tears are streaming down my face, and somebody came by and said, are you okay? Oh, yeah, it's just an email from my daughter. It was so powerful in that it helped me understand, like, have I been this clueless that here's my baby and she's grown up and I've never gotten to know her? And so I worked to help strengthen my relationship with her, but I also wondered, am I the only father of daughters that's this clueless? And so it started kind of as a hobby that I would start asking dads, and then I started advertising, and not paid advertising, but just advertising in men's groups and online and things like that. And eventually 101 fathers came forward. I ended up doing recorded interviews, and because I have my behavioral management background, then I knew how to ask deep questions. And I wasn't doing it originally to write a book or do a website or start a project or anything. I was doing it because I wanted to figure out what's going on. I don't understand what's going on with me as a dad, and how can I be a better dad? But generally, they were 2-hour interviews and quite intense. A third of the dads cried on the calls, which was really powerful for me. It was great being on the phone because I was on the other end. So a dad would be talking about something, and tears would be streaming down my face. And I go, okay, next question is, So people heard the tapes. I got releases from all the dads except 6. They're really personal and intimate discussions, and so people who heard the recordings, and then we turned them into transcripts, so they read the transcripts, said, you've got to share this with people. This is just too deep. And so, I got a coach that helped also, and I turned it into a book. And it's like eavesdropping on dads of daughters when no woman's in the room. And it's really, it's fun, but it's also just, women and men consume the book differently. And so I saw one of my daughters and then her husband, and they don't have kids yet, but so she was reading the book, and it's fun because it's like popcorn. You can go through it, and you can open it up anywhere and just start reading stuff. You can stop it and come back to it. And so she read it, and it was fine. And her husband picked it up, because she put it on a table, and he couldn't put it down, and he was just going through it because it was like the experience that I had is that when I was listening to the dads, they started saying stuff, and in my mind I would go, oh, wow, I never thought about that.
And it sounds like when you were talking to the men as well, it was kind of your way of working through the situation with your daughter. It kind of helped both of you. The men got to share their points of view and what happened in their life, and you got to hear feedback from them and maybe helped you understand what was going on in the relationship with your daughter and probably all of your daughters.
Absolutely. And the relationship with each of my daughters is different. Before we had kids, I thought, wow, I get kids, they're all going to be the same, and it'll be easy. If I figure out one, I figure out all. But I also learned, and two things happened from my doing this, the Father-Daughter Project. The first one was I reached out and started examining my relationship with my daughters and saying, like, what's really going on? Do I have a close relationship? The second one was tools. I started to recognize I was screwing up in certain ways. Like my middle daughter, Lauren, with the one that they pulled the towel off and all that. So we were sitting at dinner, and she was talking about a problem she had, that she had lost a job for no reason of hers. It was just a stupid boss, basically, that did this thing, and everybody couldn't believe that she lost her job. And then she got another job because somebody recognized how amazing she was and all that. And so we're sitting at dinner, and I turned to her and I started giving her advice. And she got all offended, and she got up and she left. And people said, wow, Lauren was rude. But I went, in my mind, I knew something went on. What just happened? And it took a few days, and I finally realized what it was. And I called her and connected her with her on this. And she acknowledged that this is absolutely what happened. I'm giving her advice. By giving her advice, I think I'm showing her that I love her. But what I'm really doing is I'm showing her how smart Daddy is. And I'm actually, in a way, telling her how stupid she is. You're stupid. Let Daddy tell you how to live your life. And I realized all she wanted was for me to reach out and hug her and say, I knew you're wonderful. People are going to realize this, and that's why things work out for you, because you're just amazing. Instead, I was sitting and blabbing away and giving her advice. And I suddenly became ashamed, and I realized, I've been a consultant for much of my life. And so my life is about giving advice. And here I was, my whole relationship with Lauren was about giving her advice whenever I was with her. Not every time, but in general. And I never sat and listened to her and just shut up and let her talk and tell me what was going on in her life. I was too busy telling her advice. And I realized as I went through the book, a lot of the guys talked about this, that they said, the more I try to get close to my daughter and show her I love her, the more I seem to push her away, and I don't understand why. And so having gone through that experience, when I experienced this with Lauren, that I was seemed to push her away when I was just trying to get closer to her, it got me to examine what was going on. And I just got this epiphany, and I started to realize, wow, I that's what I'm doing. I bet a lot of the guys, we're problem solvers. In the olden days, we killed dinosaurs. Those giant things that are 20 feet or 40 feet tall, whatever it is. In science, they say there's the two sides of the brain, the left brain and the right brain. The emotional side is the right brain, and then the left brain is the logic side. And it's connected by this thing that's called the corpus callosum. Well, once we become male, then testosterone eats away at the corpus callosum in male brain. And so that means that our emotional side and our logical side have a disconnect. One lady, I was telling her this, and she said, yeah, I always knew men were brain damaged. But the point is that the communication centers of our brain are on the right side, also the emotional side. And part of, I think, why hereditarily it's divided is because we can be, if we're killing a dinosaur, we can't be overwhelmed with emotion, because it could be pretty scary. You've got to be able to turn off your emotion. And so guys do that really well, in fact, really well. In fact, there are two ways guys screw up a relationship, by the way. We talk or we don't talk.
Yeah, there's no happy medium. It's either
right.
Or, yeah. I'm so glad you shared that story and that example, because that resonates with me so much, and I suspect with many, many daughters. And you have a quote, I believe it's probably from the book, and it says, quote, "This is a trap many of these dads fell into, continually telling a daughter what to do. This disconnect with a daughter could often be traced back to her not being trusted to figure things out for herself." And when I read that personally, I went, aha, because that was my situation with my father, and I came at it in the same way, like, he thinks I'm a little girl, he thinks I can't handle this, he doesn't listen to me, I just want to be heard and held and touched. And this just hit the nail on the head for me. I understand now, and your explanation, even the physical elements of what goes on in the brain and why that is happening, makes a lot of sense. So thank you for going into that. Let me change direction just a little bit here. Fathers of daughters, are they just different from other men, other fathers in general?
Absolutely. they don't start out that way, and they don't realize they're going to go through this transformation. But how we interact with a daughter is totally different from how we interact with other women. I had a 9/11 fireman who was on, from New York fireman who was in 9/11, and he has a 13-year-old daughter. She's just becoming 13, or was when I interviewed him. And he talked about how he grew up in a house of boys. So he said, when I got my daughter, I realized that girls are like aliens, which I thought was a funny thing to say. But I understand where he's coming from. And he said, because I grew up in a household of boys, I didn't know how to interact with females. And the only interaction I've had, he didn't talk about his mom, but the only interaction he's had has been predatory in many ways. Here's this buff, he's a good-looking fireman. He's just got all these traits that are attractive to many women, and he played the field. And he said, so now he talked about, so funny. He said, I'm trying to get because as a fireman you get days off. You work 48 hours, so for the rest of the week he's a stay-at-home dad, and he gets to be at home with his daughter. And he said, so I'm trying to get her to clean up her room, but she's drawing all these pictures, and on each one of the pictures is a heart, and it's got her and her daddy inside the heart. He said, and she looks at me and smiles. How do you get her to do anything? Does anybody know how to discipline a child? I mean, she's, he's like, But then he said, but how do I warn her about guys like me, that she's getting at 13, that we only had one thing on our mind, and I'm terrified because I don't know how to warn her, And it's such a funny thing, Chris Rock has a funny line, so it's really neat when you see like big celebrities who are, when they suddenly get a daughter. And Chris Rock has this line. He said, the number one role of a father is to keep his daughter off the pole, meaning the stripper's pole.
Oh yeah. Okay, got it.
So it's just, and it's funny, by the way, women, I have to explain stripper's pole. For guys, every guy gets it. So the relationship we have, often we can hurt a relationship with a female by talking because we're not connected. So we don't think, my wife changed her hair. She's blonde with long hair, and she got it cut short and got it cut and made it curled and changed color to brown. And she came in one day and said, what do you think? And I said, you look terrible. What did you do? And she started crying. I said, I'm sorry. You can't take it back once you say it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And she darted right back to the hair. She said, they were just experimenting on me. I don't know what they did. And she went back, and they were closed, and she was knocking on the window. You've got to let me back in. You've got to change it. So my daughter said, what did you say to Mom? And you made her cry. And I told them, and they said, don't you know you're supposed to lie? Sorry, I didn't read the rule book. I didn't know. She asked me my opinion.
And you gave it in all honesty. And that's a big, in male-female relationships in general, particularly intimate relationships, that whole thing of what do you think, honey? And the guy, if he tells you what he really thinks, then we aren't necessarily ready to hear it. We want him to say you're amazing and gorgeous no matter what. But there's a fine line too between honesty. So, but speaking of women, did you interview any women at all when you were doing this project?
Yes, and more women after I interviewed all the men and we put the book to bed than during, although many women during. And it was really profound in so many ways. So I have a story. Do I have time to do a quick story before our break?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'd like to give two stories. One is my mom's, but I'll give that after. But so Maggie is a copywriter in Santa Barbara, and she read the book, and in the beginning it talked about this one dad who was struggling to try to get closer to his daughter, but the more he tried to get close, the further he pushed her away. And she got this hit suddenly. She's in her 60s, Maggie, and she's from Ireland originally. And she said, when I was young, I remember my dad coming in from drinking with the boys, which is a common occurrence back then. And he came up and said, can I help you with your homework? And I said, no, I could smell booze on him and whatever, liquor. And he turned, I guess, humiliated, and he walked out of the house. He didn't leave forever, but he left. And she said, when I was reading this, I suddenly got a hit, and I realized, I bet my dad was trying to show me he loves me in the only way he knew how, and I humiliated him. And suddenly I think back, there were several times, that was the first one, but there were several times, I always thought my dad was this cold fish who didn't love me and just didn't care about me. I bet he was trying to show me he loves me in the only way he knows how, and he was terrified of me that I would humiliate him. And that's why he would try it, but he would try timidly. And she said, my dad passed away 10 years ago, and I feel really bad because I'd love to sit down and chat with him, because I bet, you know, she even said that I haven't never had a close relationship with a man throughout my life. I've had, you know, flings and whatever. But she says, I believe a lot of it is, only now that I'm thinking of this, is related to my false impression of my relationship with my dad.
What an eye-opener. I can only imagine the shift in her as she's coming to that realization.
Yeah.
You mentioned another story, and we have time for that one too, if you want to share it.
Okay, so I realized I'm interviewing women and daughters. My mom, I think of her as a mom, but she's a daughter also. And so my mom has been married 3 times, okay? And at this point, I want to tell her about that she's been married twice, okay, before the third one. And she had an emotionally abusive dad. Not physically abusive, but his wife, her mom left him with 4 kids to raise on his own. And he was bitter for most of his life and took a lot of that bitterness out on my mom. You know, you're not good enough, nobody's ever going to love you, and things like that. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't, I don't believe he was mean intentionally, but he couldn't control his emotions, and because she was there and the girl, she's the one that got the brunt of it, and it really affected her. And so the first 2 relationships she had, including my dad, was the first one, were emotionally abusive, with emotionally abusive guys. So I called her up 24 years ago. She's already divorced for 2 men. And I said, hey, Mom, what's up? And she said, oh, I'm teaching Norman, who has the condo downstairs from me, how to dance. I said, oh, okay, how come? She said, well, his wife died of cancer about a year ago, and if somebody doesn't teach this guy how to socialize and dance, he's gonna be lonely for the rest of his life. I said, oh, that's nice. What's he like? Oh, he's the sweetest guy. You can't imagine. He's such a sweet guy. I said, oh, okay, what does he look like? Oh, he's really cute. So I'm thinking, and I said to her, well, why don't you go out with him? And without a blink, she said something that took a few days for me to understand interacting with her. She said, oh, he's too square. Now, what does too square mean? It took a few days, and she finally explained, he's nice to me, and I'm not used to being with somebody who's nice to me. The good news is, in the next 4 months, she married him and had 20 of the most amazingly wonderful years of her life. And he passed away a few years ago of esophageal cancer. And I remember her holding his hand in the hospital, the 2 of them whispering and kind of joking to each other. And it was so touching and wonderful to see my mom. But I wonder how many times in her life was she just an inch away from the guy of her dreams, and because she was uncomfortable because of her relationship with her dad, that she just didn't feel it was the place for her to be. And it blew my mind, just understanding how could we be, as a father, as a dad, could I have such an impact on my daughter that it would affect her literally for her entire life? It was just, it was scary and wonderful at the same time. Wonderful when I realized it, because I realized, well, but I can repair it. I don't know the damage I did, but I was dumb when I started because I was a new dad. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah. That's so important because you had the realization. And once you have the realization, then you can figure out what to do next in order to repair or move forward. But it's when we don't get the realizations that we can't really grow and change. And I think what you're doing in this book is going to help a lot of people get those realizations, as it has already. And I do want to continue with this fascinating conversation. And we are going to take a bit of a break. And when we come back, Jim, I want to ask you to tell me something else that fathers don't understand about their daughters. You already shared a very important one about that, telling them what to do versus just listening to them. And I want you to think about that for a minute and come back with at least a couple of other things that fathers just don't get about their daughters. So hang with us for just a moment. We will be back with James Bond, and you do not want to miss the rest of this fascinating conversation. Hi, it's Lori Dean, and welcome back to Help My Midlife Sucks. James Bond is my special guest tonight. And no, not that James Bond. We've been through that already. James is the author of The Secret Life of Fathers. And we've been talking about not only the book itself, but the revelations that he is sharing with the rest of the world based on interviews with over 101 fathers of daughters. And James, before we went to break, I said that when we came back, I wanted to know something that fathers just don't understand about their daughters. Maybe a couple of really important things that we can take away.
Sure. I'll give you let me give it to you in story, okay?
Sure.
So I'm sitting with a bunch of guys who are fathers with daughters, and I asked the big question. A dog knows you love him because you walk him, you hug him, and you give him treats. So how does your daughter or any female in your life know that you love her? And without a blink, this is a typical guy answer, the guys laughed and said, we walk her, we hug her, we give her treats.
Okay.
The bigger question came up is, does your daughter really know you love her? And it took a long time for them to start speaking. And once one started speaking, it was almost like one would begin a sentence, the next would continue the sentence, et cetera. We all seemed to be in sync with this. And it was, guys said, when it comes to emotional things, I want to tell my daughter how I feel about her, how important she is to me, but I don't know how. But if somehow the ball got started, like she started asking me, I would love to tell her, but I need a catalyst somehow to let her know how I feel. So what they're saying is, and most of the guys said this, I want to tell her how I feel. I just don't know how to open the door so I can tell her how I feel. And because it feels like uncomfortable talking about emotional stuff, I'll sit there in pain, emotional pain, by not telling my daughter instead of actually telling her. In fact, I asked a bunch of the guys, it's one of the questions I asked in general is, does your daughter know you love her? And they would say yes. And I would say, yes, I think so. Whenever a guy would say, yes, I think so, I would say, have you ever told her? And they would go, generally, well, no, I never actually used those words, but I think she knows that, don't you think? And for guys, no, I don't think she knows that. I mean, maybe at a deep level she understands it or accepts it, but not, if you don't say it, how does she know? And so that's one area. And the other area is how, and this was mind-blowing for me, of how easy it is if we don't speak, how easy it is for our daughter to misunderstand what's really going on. Okay, and so this is one of the guys I interviewed. The last interview in the book was a celebrity. I can't say who the celebrity was, but we give a name so people have that. So he abandoned his daughter Carla when she was 10 years old. What he did was he divorced her mom when Carla was little, but stayed connected with her until she was 18 years old. You have her for the weekends or birthdays and stuff like that and holidays. At 18, he cut off all interaction with Carla. He even changed his phone number, and Carla was devastated, wondering, what did I do that my daddy wouldn't want to interact with me? When 10 years later, when she was 28, she accidentally bumped into her dad in New York City, and they become really close, and she's married, and so her dad met her husband, and they're just great buddies. They just love their dad, and they do things together. So 3 years later, after the meeting that they had, and now she's close to her dad, she's been always terrified to bring up the topic of how come her dad stopped talking to her. But she heard about the Father-Daughter Project from a friend, somebody we had interviewed, and she said, I have no idea what you guys are asking because we wouldn't let people know, so we keep it kind of a clean interview, a pure interview. And she said, but you got to interview my dad. And we said, explain to her, we record them, but it's up to him whether he shares the recording with you. He may not want to because they're so personal. She said, I'm fine with that. I'm willing to take a chance, but you got to talk to my dad. In fact, she was the only one that, 5 minutes before the call, she said, okay, I want to make sure my dad's on the line. I want to make sure he's going to be in the interview. So it's great. So her dad, we had a great interview with him, and he shared the interview with her, the recording with her at night. And the next day she said, do you realize what you've done now? I'm thinking like we've like really screwed up. I am so sorry. She said, no. You got my dad to talk about the elephant in the room. And it turns out that it had nothing to do with Carla. It was his next wife who said that she'd leave him if he had any interaction with his past family. And so he had tremendous guilt that he talked through about abandoning, how he abandoned his daughter and how ashamed he was and how he couldn't believe that she'd forgive him. But he said for me, the most surprising thing was he didn't realize that not telling Carla, she got the wrong idea. All this time she thought it was something she did. So the most important lesson for me, and I think for a lot of people, is realize that things that go unsaid are often misunderstood. But also, and for many dads and daughters, even after years and decades, it still may not be too late to repair that relationship. And just one more thing on this. So I was telling somebody from my church this. I just started talking to him, and immediately, you could see the body language. He suddenly didn't want to have eye contact with me, and he got all, like a tail between the legs, And I said, "What's up?" And he said, "My new wife, I have 2 daughters, and my relationship is really strained because my new wife doesn't like me talking to my daughters." It becomes so complicated. And so because he doesn't talk to his daughters, I go back to this with Carla, is that, they're going to may get the wrong idea of what's really going on, that it has nothing to do with that he loves her or doesn't love her, but that he's stuck with this, stupid relationship thing that he has in his mind, that he's willing to, put sex, if I can say that, but in relationship above his relationship with his daughter. And to me, this is the thing that I realized. The term till death do us part is more relevant between a father and a daughter than it is between a husband and a wife, because she's going to be connected with you forever, regardless. And we see this with adopted daughters, that they're searching. I was reading the Steve Jobs book, and his sister Mona Simpson, he finally found his mom and all that stuff. And it's like he needed to find out how he was connected. Funny enough, she wanted to find a dad. He didn't care about it. It's a guy thing, But I heard this interview with this lady who was the product of a sperm donor. And she spent, her mom got a, test tube baby. She was a test tube baby. She spent 2 years trying to track down who her biological father was. She went to Yale University. She figured out it was a student from Yale University, and she figured roughly the year. It must have been about this year or this year. And she was going through all the photographs in detail to try to find who looked the most like her. She found a few people. She finally tracked down this one guy, and she said, "I think you're my father." And he was so delighted. The 2 of them had this fantastic connection. And this is so sad. Then they did the DNA and found that they weren't connected. And she said, "I was crushed. I couldn't breathe." And he was crushed also that we were not connected. But it's in us that we need to, our connection, particularly a father with a daughter, is so deep. It's just incredible.
And what I'm hearing from what you've been saying, I guess 3 real important takeaways for me personally. First of all, as you mentioned, things that go unsaid are often totally misunderstood. It's never too late to repair damage or say I'm sorry or make amends or any of that. And the third is we need this connection. We need to discover who we are, where we came from, and fill in those missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle so that we can understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I just want to change directions here. At the beginning of the show, I mentioned briefly that I've been spending the last few years trying to untangle this complicated relationship I had with my late father. And of course, I've been coming at it from my perspective. I've never stopped to consider his point of view. And that makes me wonder about us daughters in general in terms of looking at our fathers, and also makes me wonder, is there something or one big thing that we just don't understand about our dads?
I think it's that dads want to reach out and don't understand how. And that's why, we have our website, which is the Father-Daughter Project, and you can go to the website. We have questions. We actually have a free booklet, ebook, that's called 7 Questions Every Woman Needs to Ask Her Father. And it's because, as I've discovered in my own personal experience, that dads we want to talk, we want to share, we want to connect emotionally. We just don't know how. But if you start asking us, we'll open up with you and tell you what's going on. We just don't know how. So once you open the gate, create the bridge, then we'll tell you exactly what's going on.
You mentioned the Father-Daughter Project, and of course we've been talking a lot about the book specifically, but can you tell us in an overview what the project is about?
Yes, and helping improve the relationship between fathers and daughters. It was worldwide, but my vision originally for this is that there was the girl in, I guess, Afghanistan who got shot in the face by the Taliban. She was like 14 years old because she was going to school, and people don't notice that her father was with her every time they showed a photograph of her. And they went to England. They went to England so she can get surgery and all this stuff. And so, to me, I understand how powerful the relationship is with the father. And so here's the thing, a political thing, okay? People don't understand how much daughters of politicians have had an influence on our laws. In that, if you go back to the suffragettes, there's Genevieve Clark, and her father was named Champ Clark, who was the Speaker of the House. Well, when they were trying to get they're trying to get the laws passed for women's rights and women's rights to vote, it was the daughters of the politicians that told their dads, and Genevieve Clark is one of the key ones, "Daddy, you better vote right on this," okay? And he had voted wrong previously. And let me tell you, there's a power of a daughter for a father that it doesn't exist for any other relationship in the world. When your daughter tells you this, and if you have a good relationship with her, you better do that. Or you're, so.
And it never goes away. It's always been there and always will be. And I think for those of us who are listening, and we're all in the midlife years, we can start to go back and look at the connection between ourselves and our fathers. Or if we're a father, we can look at the connection between ourselves and our daughter, if our daughter is now grown. And there are various stages and various kinds of connections that happen at various stages. And one of the things I like about the book is that it covers 10 very specific stages. And stage number 10 is actually where we are now, age 49 and up, which I believe you're calling maturity. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of talk in a little bit more detail about that stage for those of us who are there and those of us who are still lucky to have our fathers around, that we can maybe help strengthen the relationship before one or both of us pass away. And for those of us who have lost our fathers already, to help us understand what might have been a difficult relationship that was never resolved.
Right. So just before I do that, because you're talking about the stages, one of the toughest stages for dads was when she suddenly gets the car keys and driver's license.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I just got a visual, because suddenly she doesn't have to rely on you for where she goes.
Okay,
Makes
makes sense.
About independence, it was really powerful.
And also, what can go on in cars with boys, I suppose, comes into play as well.
That's right. There's just, let me tell you, the mind. One dad said, I'm trying to figure out what kind of dad I want to be. Do I want to be the dad that kind of scares the boyfriends, that I have to meet them all when they come to the door? And in fact, the divorced dads have the hardest time with this, because they say, she's going out and dating, and I'm not there. And not that I'm not there because I want to scare anyone, but I'm not there, and this is an important time in our life. And so that becomes pretty hard. The senior issues, so this lady, MC, was telling me this, okay? She was going through this, senior years. And she's one of the top celebrity photographers, portrait photographers in the United States. She photographs, major celebrities and all that. And she's from Paris, she's French, and she said, all my life I've had an unsupportive dad. He's been cold and aloof. And so recently she was going back home just to visit friends to Paris. And I said, well, why don't you take the questions from the Father-Daughter Project and just run them by your dad? Mostly because I was trying to get feedback from a woman's standpoint, because I did the questions, but what's it like when a woman does the questions? And she went, no, my dad's, I don't know, that's not going to work out. But she finally said, you know what, I have nothing to lose. Why don't I try it? So she called her dad when she got to Paris, And to her surprise, her dad was actually really receptive. Oh, she said, my friend is doing this thing, and he's got this interview that daughters interview their dads, and I wonder if I could sit down and interview you. And he was delighted, actually. So she said she was really floored. But when she sat down with him and started doing a few of the questions, he suddenly changed his mind. She said, you can feel, you can feel the wall come up, because I'm asking personal questions. And so she rolled her eyes and went, okay, I knew this was going to be a waste of time, and she left, and then went visiting with her friends for the next few weeks. But a strange thing happened when she got back to Los Angeles, where we live, the Los Angeles area, and the phone rang, and guess who it was? It was her dad. And she thought, was something wrong, Dad? Are you okay? Because her dad never called unless something was wrong. But no, he just wanted to chat. And he chatted about, his life a little bit and her life. And she said it was so strange. My dad never wanted to chat. And then, so I said, well, you're a photographer and you've got all these amazing photographs. Why don't you send him a link to your website? And she said, no, my dad's never been supportive and I don't need him putting me down. I said, oh, come on. And so she finally said, okay, fine. And she sent him the link to her website. And I got a call. And about a week later, it was really a strange call because she's a tough lady, really tough. And she was, you can tell that she was holding back her tears as she was crying. And she said, my dad saw the website, and he called me, and he said, c'est incroyable. It was just the most incredible thing, and he was just full of compliments and gushing. And she said, I've never had a dad before. This is so strange. And this is, she's, in her midlife. And where did this start? It started with her trying the questions. And even though she didn't get through them, she got through to her dad that she wanted to have this connection, a deeper connection. Well, 2 months later, I got a message on my cell phone of her crying. And she said, my dad's going into the hospital. They think he has cancer. And she says, I finally have a relationship with him, and go figure, and now I'm going to lose him. And so the message in this is, you don't wait till it's too late if your dad's alive. Especially dads seem to soften. We seem to soften when we're older. And we also understand how important the connection is with our daughter. And so I think more importantly than anything else is, on the dad side, if you're a dad, reach out and just take a chance, take a risk. You're brave. You can do this. And I know it feels like it's tough, but it requires bravery. That just be open and naked. I don't mean naked, but be open and honest about your feelings. And with a daughter, recognize that your dad wants. In most cases, there's no question there's some bums out there, but I think fewer than most people realize. I think most dads want to have a better relationship with their daughters. They just don't know how. And all you have to do is just somehow reach out. And a good way is try the interview. Just say, hey, I got this interview thing. I'd like to sit down and interview you about your life and just our connections and how we relate. And I think it's, I have women that are saying it's so much fun. I have this one lady that was telling me that, it was so weird that my dad was telling me, I love my dad. And it's so great because she did it, and 6 months later her dad passed away, and she's got this, and she's so happy. She's got the memories of this. But she said her dad was a cartoonist, political cartoonist for newspapers. It was really cool. And she said, I was talking to my dad about this, and he got all guilty, and he said, I'm so sad. I'm so bad. I feel so bad that I've never really, spent time with you. And she said, Daddy, you're crazy. Do you remember I used to wake up at night and you'd be drawing at night, and you'd call me over and sit me on your lap, and you'd show me the drawings you're doing and explain to me what you're doing? I mean, those were the memories I have. And it was a moment of connection that the two of them had that, it brought them in sync where they recognized, yeah, we are connected, and what a great relationship.
I love that because, of course, we have those memories from our childhood that might be different from what our father has because we're both in different places at that time. So if you get a chance to get together and compare memories, it can really strengthen the bond. And also any kind of misunderstanding can be dealt with because in the case you just described, the father had one memory of being neglectful to his daughter, yet the daughter had these beautiful memories of being able to sit on his knee and watch him draw and have him explain to her what he was doing. That was a treasured memory, and yet the dad was so wrapped up in his work, he didn't see it that way. And even if you only have a few months left in each other's lives before the father passes, or you do. I think you can build so much in making that effort and making that connection. And I love the fact you have questions to help us along, because my dad has been gone since 1992. And in those final years, there was a lot going on in my life. And I knew he was not healthy, and I didn't know how to connect with him, and he didn't know how to connect with me, because we'd always had a very surface relationship. And I wish I would have had a door opener like these kinds of questions were at that time. And between then and now, every little tidbit I get about his life, I devour from wherever it may come from. I want to know who he was. He was always just my dad, and my dad at various stages of his life behaving in certain ways. But what was he like as a man? And what did those experiences do to contribute to the way he was as a father? So for me, there's that bittersweet hole that I didn't get to do that. So for those listeners who still have their dad around, no matter what stage things are at, I think this kind of questionnaire is a brilliant door opener, and I don't think it can hurt, and God knows what it can produce in your relationship.
Right. And so about a year and a half ago, I got an email from this lady who said, because it isn't only dads, but it is dads. Dads are our window on men in many ways. I mean, your dad was the first man in your life. And she said that her husband had passed away about a year ago. It was a lady in Baltimore. She said, my husband had passed away about a year ago, and I realized we don't have any recordings of his voice. And I kind of remember, I think the Father-Daughter Project interviewed my dad. And I said, yep, that's, in an email back and forth, yep, that's us. And do you have recordings of it? And I said, absolutely, yes. And I sent it to her. And she pretty well fell on the floor when I didn't hear from her for a while. And I wasn't sure if she got the recordings. And I contacted her, and she said, you have to understand, you asked him questions that I never asked him, my husband, about our relationship, about my daughters. She has 2 daughters. Talk about a stripper's pole. One of them was a stripper, and how much guilt he felt over that, and how much he tried to reach out. And it's amazing that she said that since he passed away, that she has changed her life. And so it was just, the connections were powerful. But she also recognized that, I wish I had asked him questions so that I can connect with him and understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Also.
It's very important. And I can't believe it, but we are running out of time. And there's so many more questions I want to ask you in so many different ways that I'd love to carry on this conversation. So will you come back on the show at some point and we can continue that?
Sure.
Awesome, Jim. And I just want to make sure that people know how to get the book and how to find out more about the Father-Daughter Project.
Well, the book's on Amazon, but the best way to get it is go to the Father-Daughter Project, thefatherdaughterproject.com. And there's information on the book and then some other things. We have some questions, so you can go through that and download those and try them with your dad as well.
So it's thefatherdaughterproject.com to get the questions and to get a copy of the book. And I'm going to go there as soon as we're done and get my own copy of the book. So James Bond, I really want to thank you for spending time with us. It's gone way too fast, and I'm glad you're willing to come back again, because we can pick up sort of where we left off and get some more answers to the other questions that I think a lot of us have about this very, very important relationship in all of our lives. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Lori.
Got to take a quick break, and then I will be back to tell you what's coming up next week on Help, My Midlife Sucks. So don't go anywhere. That is it for this week's episode of Help, My Midlife Sucks. Once again, thanks to James I. Bond for joining us here to talk about the Father-Daughter Project and, of course, his highly acclaimed book, The Secret Life of Fathers. I found it fascinating, and I suspect you did as well. Next week, the baby boomer relationship guru Victoria Howard joins me on the show, and she is the nation's advocate for safe sex in baby boomers. And by nation, I'm talking about the U.S. for my Canadian listeners. She's the author of 10 books, and her latest is Dating Over 50. It is a guide for baby boomers who are out there dating. She coaches men and women on relationships, dating, and safe sex. She's the founder of the Kick 'em to the Curb dating game, the Butterfly Movement, Cupid's Arrow, and the Baby Boomer Singles Group in South Florida. And she's going to be talking in part about STDs among baby boomers. Yeah, it's apparently quite a big deal, so we'll find out more from Victoria Howard next week on the show, which, as you know, begins at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, right here on Boost Radio Network. Thank you so very much for being here this week, and I look forward to having you back next week. I am Lori Dean, and don't forget to always ask yourself, what else is possible?
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to join the Help My Midlife Sucks VIP Club to get the lowdown on upcoming show topics, guests, show times, past episodes, resources, and more. Go to midlifemouthpieceproductions.com and sign up now. Once again, that website is midlifemouthpieceproductions.com. Until next week, be well and stay curious.